Hi mamas, I'm Jordyn, and my husband Connor and I have been attending Substance for about 9 years. You might find us serving together downtown at the Welcome Team for Kids check-in, and we have 3 kiddos, ages 4.5, 2.5, and 6 months. And we often say, we live in complete chaos most of the time, with a tad bit of precious, cute moments sprinkled in there too. I bet a lot of you can relate. I feel so honored today to be talking to you about finding refuge in God's goodness, even in the middle of just grief and hard seasons of motherhood. So just a little bit about how I got this word for you guys today. A few weeks ago, I was messaging back and forth with some of my friends, and they were just going through really tough seasons and having rough days. One of them was postpartum and had just suffered the loss of somebody she loved really deeply. The other one was in the middle of family drama, and just wrestling with that question of what am I even doing in motherhood? What is my purpose? And of course, they both had babies, toddlers, and preschoolers. They were wrangling, for lack of a better term, during that day. So they were just struggling and crying out to the Lord, friends for help, and words of affirmation, all those things. So I just was able to go to the Lord and say what do my friends need? It was actually one of those days, didn't happen before this and hasn't happened since, that all 3 of my kids were napping for a hot 10 minutes. So I was able to sit and ask the Lord, what do my friends need? And God said to me, taste and see that the Lord is good. I remember hearing that verse before, taste and see that the Lord is good. And I kind of shot back at God, God, I don't want to tell my grieving, hurting friends that. That sounds a little cliche, just taste and see the Lord's good, guys, you got it. But God was just just look it up, keep reading. So I found it in Psalm 34:8, and it says this: taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. And I read that second part again with just new eyes. The second part is, oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. And it really hit me that people who take refuge don't have their ducks in a row. They don't have their kids perfectly parented. They're in the middle of family drama. They are grieving. And by its very definition, thanks to Webster's Dictionary Online, taking refuge means seeking a condition of being safe or sheltered from pursuit, danger, or trouble. I'll say that again. Taking refuge means seeking a condition of being safe or sheltered from pursuit, danger, or trouble. So my Jordyn synopsis of that is people who are taking refuge are a hot mess, or as we mamas endearingly say too, in the thick of it. That's us, right? So often. And yet, the second part of that verse is, oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. So just a little background about when this verse was written, Psalm 34:8. King David, the King David, man after God's own heart, David, wrote this during a time of his life that wasn't the most noble. And you can find this story at the end of 1 Samuel and into 21, at the end of 1 Samuel 21 and into 1 Samuel 22. But I'll just read it for you today. So David wasn't the king yet. He had just been appointed to be the next king. And he found out that the current king, King Saul, had murderous intents for his life, meaning he wanted to kill him. So David fled to another country, which happened to be the country that had been enemies of God's people forever, which is a strange place to flee to, but God used it. And so anyway, when he got there, he found out that they didn't necessarily want him there either. And he literally had to trick them by faking that he was insane or crazy. So he was drooling in his beard, and the Bible says he was scratching at the gate to get out. And they believed him. They believed he was crazy, and they let him go. And so then he went and hid in a cave, and that's when scholars think that he wrote this psalm. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. So he literally lied. He faked it. Not exactly a highlight of King David's life, right? Which to me is often a lot like mothering. Like for a lot of us, not exactly the highlight all the time. And so it encourages me, and I hope it encourages you, that David wrote, "Taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him," when he was hiding in this cave. So ladies, if you're like hiding, that is when you can take refuge. Mamas, I don't know what your danger or your trouble is today. I don't know what you're seeking safety from or shelter or refuge. I don't know if you or someone you know is in the middle of a mental health crisis. I don't know if you just had a miscarriage. I don't know if it's seeking shelter from your toddler's tantrums. That was me, like last week, this morning. I don't know if you're having marital stress or just like over this whole quarantining thing and miss some of your family and friends. But you need to know that you have a God who wants you to seek refuge in him, and he will save you. He will save you. Soak in this verse, another psalm that I'm going to read from Psalm 91, 1 through 4. And in this verse, there are so many references to taking refuge in God and how God will save us. So listen to it. Psalm 91, 1 through 4. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely he will save you from the fowler snail and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. I just love so many of that. It says he, not like he might save you, he will save you from the deadly pestilence. And I also love that picture of God as a protector. And it says he will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. That's such a beautiful picture to me, and it gives me so much peace. Ladies, at this point, you might be thinking that's really cute, Jordyn. We'll just take refuge in God and it'll all be better. We'll just seek refuge. We'll just taste and see that the Lord's good. It'll all get better, right? Like that. So much easier said than done, I know. And lately, I've been really inspired by a good friend of mine who has been walking this out really well, and I've been learning a lot from her. Last summer, she suffered an absolutely incomprehensible loss, the worst of all that we could imagine. She and her husband were expecting a baby. She got to 40 weeks. She went into her appointment. Something was just off. They ended up inducing her, and she had an emergency C-section. And he was born alive, but unable to ever breathe on his own. And 2 days later, he went to be with Jesus. And there's so much more to my friend's story that I have time to tell today. But recently, I was able to ask her, what has it meant for you to seek refuge in the Lord during this whole season of grief? And this is what she said, ladies. This blew me away. This is so wise. In my life, taking refuge in God can be both a sentiment and an action. I'll read that again because I just think it's so good. In my life, taking refuge in God can be both a sentiment and an action. So sentiment meaning this feeling we have or an attitude about God, or this just thought, this notion about him that we just know. But the action part is what has been really changing and challenged my approach to hard seasons. And it also got me back to thinking about the verse, taste and see that the Lord is good, because both tasting and seeing are actions. Sure, we can taste and see just naturally, we can just do that. We can taste and see our surroundings. Well, unless you're like my toddler, you don't taste your surroundings, but you know what I mean. You can taste your food. You can just taste it and see things without really trying. But if you pay more attention, you actively taste, you actively see, you catch more, we experience more, we can sense more. And so a lot of ways, I think this is a lot like experiencing the Lord's goodness. Often we can taste or see it without really trying, right? God, it's God. He's not going away. His goodness isn't going away. But if we take an action towards him, we can experience Jesus in a new way, in a new depth that we maybe never have before. even during those seasons of hardship and grief. So back to my friend, my grieving friend. She told me some of her primary action steps for taking refuge, and I just thought these were really good ideas and really valid coming from someone who's grieving so deeply right now. First, she said one of her primary action steps is staying in Scripture and remembering who God is even in this storm. The second one she said is practicing stillness. This is a hard one for me. Practicing stillness and listening for God's voice and promptings. The next one she's practicing right now is being honest in prayer about her real emotions she's feeling, including the anger, the disappointment, the nervousness about the future, sadness, sharing those directly with the Lord and being like, Lord, meet me in the middle. Meet me where I'm at and in the middle. And the last one she shared with me is being intentional about connecting with others who love the Lord and can share God's truth about who He is in a really gentle way, and even in these storms of grief as she continues to ride the waves of grief. So obviously we're not all grieving to this extent, right? Like, honestly, I almost didn't feel qualified enough to give this talk simply because I'm not grieving something big right now. I don't have a deep, incomprehensible loss that personally I'm experiencing. But then God reminded me back to last spring when Pastor Peter did a message called How to Grieve Well. And in that sermon, he gives another definition for grief. And this is what he says, the definition he gives. He says, grief is just the emotional process of reacting to change. The emotional process of reacting to change. So even something as simple as your toddler giving up a nap, or your teenager learning to drive, or if you're like me and totally grieving the fact that skinny jeans and a side part and a laughing emoji now mean that we're old and not cool. Just a reminder that you can absolutely grieve all those things too. They're all just changes. We grieve change. So for me right now, personally, that looks like my baby, who's 6 months, will not nap for more than 30 minutes at a time, and decided after 5 months of taking a bottle that she decided not to take a bottle anymore. So these are changes. I'm grieving these, right? And my husband's working a lot right now because it's just his busy season right now. So some action steps for me are, just to give you some ideas, and these change obviously, but right now these are the things I'm doing. I've been asking God for like a word or a phrase, a single word or a phrase, for me, for my kids, for my husband, for friends, and then using the Bible app, the search tool, and literally searching those words and finding scriptures about those words, and then using them in my prayers and praying them over my kids, my family, my husband, whatever. And another one is literally like, I call it brain dump prayer journaling. So rather than letting my mind swirl and the anxiety and the fears kind of build up, especially dealing with that postpartum the last few months, instead brain dumping it to the Lord, just setting a timer, 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and writing it all down, giving it to the Lord as an action step of seeking my shelter in Him. So my action steps have not always looked like this, and today I'll end with a personal story about a different time in my life. When I was 18, I moved down to Haiti, and so this was right after high school, right? I was 18, I hadn't gone to college yet, I graduated high school, I moved down to Haiti, and I lived with an American missionary family. My job was to homeschool their kids, like just help clean, help with whatever they needed around the house, and support their family. And I do have like a few good memories and fun memories from that time, but overall, it was a really hard and lonely year. I lived on like the missionary compound and didn't have really any friends. It wasn't safe for me to go out. And I often just struggled to describe with words like how truly difficult it was. It was just like mundane and boring. And for the first time in my life, I had to seek refuge in the Lord. Like, I couldn't fall back on my parents and their faith. I couldn't rely on youth group, which had really been a lot of what was generating my faith up until that point. And obviously I was grieving huge changes. I moved to a different country without my family. So during that time, my action steps were literally like laying out on the roof, because roofs are flat in Haiti, laying out on the roof and listening to my iPod, Remember when we all had those? iPod, just like worshiping the Lord through worship music on my iPod. And then also prayer journaling at that time too. So at the time, it was just felt like such a dry season. I remember being like, okay, God, what am I doing? Why am I here? What's happening? I don't feel close to you. But looking back and in retrospect, I can now see that that was the time that the Lord wove together my husband and I, so win. And my friendship with Jesus grew more that year than it had than any other year of my life. And so I tell you this because sometimes the action step feels hard, or it feels like we're not getting any fruit from this. Like nothing is happening, nothing is changing. So I use this story in my life whenever I'm like entering into a hard season. I think back to this story and I think like, okay, that was a really hard season, really hard season, but God produced fruit even when I didn't feel it. So surely he will do it again. This time he will do it again. And so be encouraged to take the action step. Keep pursuing the Lord, even if it feels like nothing's happening. There will be fruit. It just you might not be able to see it. So in closing, ladies, I hope you feel inspired and encouraged to just ask God, what does it mean for me to take refuge in you right now, in this season? And I pray that when you do that, you experience Jesus in a new way, that you will taste and see that the Lord is good, and you will experience joys as you take refuge in him. Thanks, ladies.